turned off, and it seems to be being completely dismantled now. So yeah, I think they've, brilliant. Thank you so much. Okay, sorry about that. Yes, thank you very much, and Mike, and thank you very much to all of you for giving up some time on a Saturday afternoon to come and listen to me. As Mike says, I do make environmental programs for Al Jazeera, but I'm just to be clear, I'm here representing myself and not Al Jazeera in any capacity today at all. And it is a bit strange because, as Mike said, I present for an environmental program, and I find it no problem to speak to a potential audience of 352 million households, which is Al Jazeera's audience. But there's something about public talking like this which fills me with dread for some reason. So I'm really putting myself out there in doing this for reasons which I hope will become apparent in the course of my talk. So I'm talking today about connection to nature in a time of crisis. And in the course of thinking about this, I found myself remembering the first time that I had a real sort of close connection to nature, which was one cold, crisp morning in February in Gloucestershire in Britain. And I got up early and I was going on an adventure because my Uncle Tim had told me that if we'd got up early, then the chances of seeing some wildlife were really high. And so I think we got up around 6 o'clock and set off into the woods, up the track, the muddy track through the trees, and turned, after about 40 minutes of trudging through leaves and mud, we turned around the corner. And there in the middle of this track was this beautiful red fox. And it froze in that moment and stared at me. And I froze and stared, and I suddenly stopped in my tracks and stared back at it. And then it's turned around and scuttled off into the woods. And that was my first memory of a real connection with nature out in the wild that left me spellbound. And now talking about it today, I still for a long time. Surprisingly, in 2000, connecting to wildlife in its habitat. Then fast forward 40 years to my most recent encounter with a fox, and it was with another uncle of mine, Uncle Colin, in his allotment in Kilburn. Uncle Colin was a colourful character, always resplendently dressed, very outspoken, but he struggled with mental health throughout his life. And he'd gone through quite a difficult patch when he was actually quite hard to be around until he was given this allotment. And in the course of tending to the soil, of planting seeds, of eating his own tomatoes, he found calm. And it became his haven where he would hang out all the time. And as the months went by, he befriended a fox who became his more or less constant companion in the allotment. And one day when I went to see Uncle Colin, we sat on chairs outside on this gorgeous spring day and drinking cups of tea, and the fox came trotting up and sat down about 4 or 5 meters away in a pool of light and just kind of hung out and watched the world go by. And that was 4 years ago. So that was before anyone would have imagined that coronavirus, this tiny microorganism, would have brought the world to its knees. And I'm here in lockdown in the midst of the crisis in Doha, in Qatar, which is a strange place in the middle of the desert. I'll just show you a picture of Doha just to give you a sense of what it's like. Sorry, this is a bit like tapping your head and rubbing your tummy, having to talk and sort these photos out at the same time. But it's a very strange place, sort of dependent on fossil fuels and on desalination of water and air conditioning to keep it cool in temperatures that go up to 50 degrees. And here I am in a hotel in Doha, which is comfortable. I can't complain. I mean, there's a gorgeous garden outside. There's a lovely beach and no reason to complain. But of course, it's very far from home, and the emotional roller coaster has been extreme, as I'm sure it has with all of you. I mean, it's been extraordinary times. And right now, I feel happy to be alive, to have my health. I feel grateful to be here, and I feel kind of accepting of what's going on in the world. But it hasn't always been like that, because when we were just going into lockdown, about 5 weeks ago, is it now? My mum messaged me and told me that my Uncle Colin was in a really bad way. And the doctors had given him 3 days to live. And in fact, he was on his deathbed for 9 days, but it was a long, agonizing 9 days, during which his daughter, my first cousin, contracted coronavirus and had to leave his bedside after a week. And so he died on his own. And the grief that I felt about Colin's death was extreme, and it became aggravated by the grief that I felt about the world descending into collapse and all the pain and suffering. And it felt overwhelming. And this went on for about 2.5 weeks, during which I was really glad for social distancing because no one could see how puffy my eyes were from crying. But it was overwhelmed by grief. And then one day, I went for a sunset walk along the beach. As I say, I'm really lucky here to be able to do that. And it was a lovely, lovely evening, sort of balmy breeze and sort of pinkish sky. I'd taken my flip-flops off so I could feel the sand and the cold water on my feet. And I went a little bit further than usual towards the private beach at the end, which was owned by which belonged to the owner of the hotel. And as I approached the beach, mixed in with the sound of the wind and the waves on the shore, I suddenly heard these witterings. I can't replicate them now, but these kind of weird witterings, bird-like noises. And as I came closer, I saw that they came from these pink white birds. And I had to stop and take a look because I did not expect that I should come across these, let me show them to you, flamingos. These glorious, gorgeous flamingos, about 15 of them hanging out on the beach. And I stopped and I looked at them and took them in and went and sat on a ledge, which is as close as I could get, about 20 meters away from them, and sat there for about half an hour, transfixed by how weird they were and how beautiful with their kind of gangly legs and their elegant necks. And as feeling as spellbound as I had done when I first encountered that fox around 40 years ago. And somehow in observing them, in tuning into their rhythms and in realizing or sort of tuning into their complete obliviousness to the woes of humanity and to my woes, I was able to alleviate the grief and found peace. And in some way, I guess they were doing to me what the fox in the allotment had done to Uncle Colin a few years before. And since then, every day I go and see them and I tune into their rhythms and find peace and calm. And I completely adore them. And of course, this is unrequited love because they have no idea that I exist. But still, I go and I connect to them anyway. And I've been finding out quite a bit about flamingos since then. I know now that the Greater Flamingos, which are one of 6 species of flamingos. I'll tell you a few of the interesting things, or the things that I thought interesting about them. So it's their legs. These are not my flamingos. These are Caribbean flamingos. So it's their legs that get a lot of attention. But what I thought were knees, well, actually they're not, because their knees are high up above, underneath their feathers. What looks like knobbly knees is their ankles. So the bottom half is actually one large foot. And they stand on one leg, it's thought, to keep warmth as they're feeding, or perhaps just because they find it comfortable that way. So the name, it means flame-coloured in Spanish and Portuguese, and it comes from the Latin word for flame. And it's the dominant males who are the pinkest because they're strongest and who are better at finding the food. And when it's time to breed, the dominant males will go pinker, and that will trigger the rest of the gang to breed as well. And do you know what the name for a gang of flamingos is? I didn't know this before, but I just love it because, again, it comes from the Latin word for flamma, for flame. And it is flamboyance. So flamboyance of flamingos. And these James's flamingos show just how flamboyant a flamboyance of flamingos can be. So I go and see these every day. And there are other animal friends I've been making around the garden. There's the birds, the bulbul, the doves, the minor birds. There's a lot of breeding going on at the moment, which means there's a lot of overpuff males around. And the bird song is so loud, as has been reported by in northern hemisphere springs across the planet. And of course, with the ambient noise less, then the bird songs are going to sound louder. Now, some scientists say that because the birds feel less threatened, then they are bolder about singing and they sing more loudly. But whether or not that's true, then when there is ambient noise in the form of traffic, people, music, planes, whatever, then some of the messages that the birds trying to communicate in their bird song get lost, and so the chances of breeding will reduce. So the chances are now, without noisy humans around, that the breeding season will be much better this year than in the past. So we shall see. And there's another creature that I encounter in my daily wanderings around the garden. And every morning I take my yoga mat and I go out bleary-eyed towards a pavilion in the middle of the garden. And I always come across these things. Not him, not that bulbul, but this. Not just one, but at least three. And this is a scarab beetle. It's a scarab or rhinoceros beetle. But the thing is that when I meet them in the morning, they're usually on their backs, sort of kicking their legs up in the air. So I go through a little ritual of going to the nearest date tree and holding it down close to their legs, which they cling onto, and I turn them over, and then they plod on their rather slow way. And then I get on with my yoga and feel rather good for saving at least 3 lives before breakfast. Now, these are just the kind of the main companions I have on my daily routine around the garden. And of course, there are other glimpses of nature, which are just as rewarding and just as wondrous. So the fish jumping in the evening sea, the curlew I disturbed the other day, the frangipani flowers blooming now. And it's not just me. I mean, we hear reports about many other people finding healing in the powers of nature. And you might well be the same. And it wouldn't be a surprise if you were, because scientists have proven that there are healing powers in nature and that it is good for our psychological and emotional and physical well-being. And my uncle Colin was living proof of that with his allotments. And there was a study that I found really interesting that was done last year. And it said that people who went into nature, now the nature could be parks and cities, it could be the wild, and people went into nature for 2 hours each week, just 2 hours, and it could be bit by bit, or it could be in a 2-hour kind of lump. They reported better health and better psychological well-being than people who went under the 2-hour limit, the 2-hour kind of benchmark. And around the world at the moment, we are seeing many examples of the way that people are wandering and marveling at nature as our streets, our towns are rewilded. You know, we've had a puma in Chile, in Santiago in Chile. There's a civet cat in Kerala in India. In the Bosphorus in Istanbul, the dolphins are coming further up the Bosphorus than they usually venture. And then leatherback turtles, well, they're having a field day. So that's in Florida. It's also in Thailand. Where on beaches, people are reporting that there are more nest hatchings than there have been over the past 2 decades. And that only goes to show how big the impact of humans are, but also how resilient nature is. Now, it takes about 10 years for an ocean ecosystem to revive, and about 42 for a forest ecosystem. And there are areas in the world where we can see the revival happening. So, for example, the now empty, demilitarized zone between North and South Korea, which has become full of wildlife. And then there's also the Lusa forest in Indonesia and Sumatra. And that is one of the most rich and biodiverse ecosystems on the planet. It's the only place where you can find the Sumatran tiger, rhinoceros, elephants, the sun bear, and also the orangutan. And the reason why it is so well preserved is because of a civil war which went on for 3 decades. And separatist Islamic rebels holed up in the forest, and as a result, no development was possible until the ceasefire started in 2005. Now, the irony about the current rewilding which we're seeing is that it's a direct result of our dewilding of nature, because COVID-19 is a product of our destruction of the natural world. Because the basic way in which infectious diseases emerge is when viruses jump from their animal hosts and whom they kind of been living quietly into humans, in which they can replicate and cause havoc. And there are a number of ways in which that happens. So habitat loss is a key example. So deforestation, as is now happening in the Lusa forest, as the plantations come in for palm oil, for pulp, for paper, and as mining takes place. Well, when deforestation happens, then the viruses will come out of the woods with their animal hosts. And there's also climate change. Well, when it gets hotter, then animals will move around the world in search of cooler climes and taking their pathogens to previously unexplored territories. And then there's the way that we trade, we hunt, we eat wild animals. And here we've got a civet cat in a cage in a market in China. And livestock farming as well. Well, that's a brilliant way for viruses to zoom around a tightly packed herd and to become more virulent as it goes. Now, as a result of this, the amount of the emerging infectious diseases, 75% come from animals. And one of those emerges every 4 months. That's much faster than it has been ever, much, much faster. Now with coronavirus, COVID-19, the thought is that it originated in a bat, which then came into contact with an intermediary host, probably through habitat loss, deforestation, and probably through the pangolin as the intermediary host, which then had contact with a human in a wet market in Wuhan in China. Now, this is not scientifically proven yet. For example, there are recent claims that it might have been a raccoon dog that was the intermediary host. But wherever the virus originated from, the fact is that as soon as it got into a human, it basically had a field day. It was like it had won the lottery because of the way that we manage our lives. It was able to hop from people to people in mega cities and zoom on around the world in aeroplanes and basically go for world domination, as it has done. Now, I know this is going to sound strange, and I'm fully aware of the horrendous, the pain, the horror, the deaths that is happening as a result of this terrible disease. But the fact is that we've actually been quite lucky with COVID-19 because its death rate, as far as we know at the moment anyway, is relatively low. It's 3.4% compared to Ebola, for example. I mean, that's around 50%. And it's as if Mother Nature is firing a warning shot across our bows. She's screaming out to please, please respect me. And you know what? We'd better wake up and listen, because it's not just the destruction of nature, that it's not just the pandemic, as if that wasn't bad enough, that our destruction of nature is responsible for. Because of course it's the reason behind the 6th mass extinction. It's the reason why 1 million species are set to vanish from the surface of the planet. It's the reason for climate change. Our carving up of natural habitats and our rapacious use of fossil fuels is pumping greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, which boosts the global temperature, which leads to erratic temperatures, which leads to erratic weather patterns, and therefore to droughts and famine and hurricanes. And the collapse of the ecosystems, together with the collapse of the climate, basically means the collapse of the life support systems on which we depend. So I'm talking about water, food, fuel, clean air. We absolutely depend on nature for this. And basically, we've got one hell of an environmental crisis on our hands, because if we don't sort it, then we're heading for collapse of humanity itself. So while the immediate focus right now, it absolutely has to be on alleviating the horrendous pain and suffering that's being inflicted as a result of this awful disease, we have to do that while not taking our eye off the bigger picture. Because until we get right to the root cause of the problem, which is the destruction of the natural world, our exploitation of the planet and its resources, then all these problems will continue. We'll get more pandemics, more climate change, more extinctions. And the human footprint on the planet is so big that 75% of the land is affected. And at the rate we're using its resources, one planet just ain't enough for us. We actually need 1.76. By 2030, we're going to need 2. Now, obviously, we just can't continue like this. Whether it's wildlife, animals, oil, trees, water, you name it, we plunder the planet's riches and turn them into commodities. And it's killing us, because planetary health is totally interlinked with our health. And the pandemic is only showing us that to us really clearly. So back to my hotel. When I think about my new animal friends in the light of what's going on health-wise around the natural world, well, they don't give me quite so calming messages. And birds, for example, 1 in 8 species of birds are facing extinction. And that's due to climate change, habitat loss, hunting, basically all due to us. So my flamingo friends, well, they're okay. The greater flamingo, they're okay. But the Andean flamingo, that's vulnerable. And 3 other species of flamingo are near threatened. And actually, I I found out, it's a great disappointment actually, because I thought they were stopping over on a migration route. I found out that the flamingos on the beach, they're owned by the hotel owner. They are his possessions. And so an example of our attempt to control nature. What about the beetles? Well, the beetles, they seem to be healthy, the scarab beetles, these particular types, but around the world, I mean, the loss of insect populations is even worse than the birds in places. In Germany, a study was done that showed that 75% of the insect population had disappeared. And in Puerto Rico, in a rainforest in Puerto Rico, it was even worse. It showed that 90% of insects had just collapsed and vanished. And this is absolutely disastrous for all the planet's health, including our own. And because after all, we are part of the planet, we're part of the natural systems, the nature on which we depend. And because of course, insects are key pollinators and also recycle a lot of the Earth's waste and are vital for food for other animals. So my beetles, remember I said I thought they were badly designed because they kind of ended up wriggling their legs on their back. Well, actually what I realized, I spoke to a bug expert and he told me that they're not. Oh, that's the Andean flamingo that's in danger, that's vulnerable rather. And my insect friends, these scarab beetles, they're brilliantly designed, but for trees, not for man-made urban environments. So when I find them in the morning, they've made a beeline for the pillar because it's tall and they think it's a tree and they try and get up it. But their claws just don't work on smooth surfaces. So they can't get purchased and inevitably end up on their backs. And then when I was looking into these beetles, I found something else which I just found extraordinary. I came across references to people in Asia pitting rhinoceros beetles against each other in fights. And sure enough, here are some pictures in Thailand of, these are rhinoceros beetles, these are blokes, these are males, who are on a log, inside of which is a female who's emitting pheromones, which excites the men so that they fight over her, basically. I mean, I just find it extraordinary as what a symbol of the exploitation of the natural world. Whereas, of course, what the pandemic is showing us is that we are so connected to the natural world, and indeed we are part of it. So we're seeing glimmers of hope, I think, that there might be a change to all this exploitation. It's as if the environment seems to have bounded back in one fell swoop with all the lockdowns. And as the roads quiet and the air gets cleaner, the water clearer, it's as if we're conducting one huge scientific experiment. And the question is this a vision of the future? Is this going to hang around? Well, it might do, but it really depends where we go from here, because we are at a fork in the road and we have a choice. We either go down the path of sustainability, of working with nature, of working with renewable fuels and making sure that all life on Earth has a healthy future. Or we go back to business as usual. We rely on fossil fuels. We destroy nature and we create conditions for a very precarious future, which is full of climate change events and more pandemics. And right now, it could go either way. I really feel that this is crunch time. But what I'm encouraged by is that the reactions to the pandemic do show that change is entirely possible. Governments can make extraordinary measures. They can do things you'd never imagine they would do, and people will change their behavior accordingly. Now, we know what to do with COVID-19. We know what behaviors we need to adopt to protect our health. If only it was so easy for governments to adopt the hard measures the planet needs and for people to adopt the behavioral changes that protect planetary health. But of course, climate collapse, ecological destruction, it doesn't seem such a threat as a virus that is killing people around the world. And of course, it's not easy. I work in the environment, I make environmental programs, but God, I know how hard it is. I fail the whole time. And for example, the other day I was in my bathroom in the hotel, I was putting on some lipstick. I was going to an online dance party, so I was dressing up for the occasion, my new social life, and I smudged it. And so I went over to the toilet roll, loo paper, whatever you call it, the holder. And I don't know what I was thinking of, but sort of absentmindedly started taking, kind of rolling it. And then realized that I had way too much loo paper compared to what I actually needed for this tiny smudge. And I felt awful. I felt guilty. Because why was I absentmindedly just using this stuff, which of course is made of trees? But I didn't actually realize how much trees were involved in toilet paper until I just nosed around a bit. And what I found was that every day, 27,000 trees are cut down for toilet roll, which basically is 9 million trees each year. And there was one statistic, I do need to check this, but it was quite extraordinary, that said over a lifetime, then one person, of course, is like a developed world person, because most people don't use loo paper, uses 384 trees in their lifetime, which I found extraordinary. So basically, I felt awful because, you know, if I'm through the toilet paper, then I'm contributing to deforestation, and therefore possibly to viruses coming out of the woods, and therefore possibly to infectious diseases, and therefore to pandemics, possibly even this one. Oh, and I'm contributing to climate change because around 20% of greenhouse gas emissions are due to deforestation. So basically from a tiny smudge on my lip, I'd gone global. And I can pretty much do this with anything. So take water, for example, another thing in my bathroom. Well, we're told to wash our hands, and I'm guessing you too, well, we're some of the lucky ones who actually can do that. But around the world, 785 million people don't have access to clean water. So what do they do in a pandemic? Well, if I think of that, then I try and use a bit less water when I wash my own hands. And in Qatar, where most of the water is desalinated anyway, requiring huge amounts of energy, which is all fossil fuel here, then I'm doing my bit to prevent global warming, which of course only leads to further water shortages. And I'm doing my bit for now, but also in the future, because in only 5 years' time, 2/3 of the planet will be facing water shortages at some point during the year, which is quite a sobering thought. And of course, water losses don't just affect humans, but they also affect animals. So for example, flamingos, well, they don't mate when there's less rainfall. Less rain, drought, there's going to mean that less babies, their populations will be more vulnerable. And on top of that, you know, they're also facing threats, man-made threats, pollution, habitat, egg collection. And having nosed into loo roll, I thought I'd nose a little bit into flamingos as well. And what I discovered was that in East Africa, in the Rift Valley in East Africa, which is one of their favorite habitats, just jumping through here. Well, there's a image of how dry the world is getting. So this is a lake in East Africa's Rift Valley, which is awash with flamingos. It's one of their favorite places to gather. These are lesser flamingos. But in recent years, over the past 15 years, strange things have been going on because the corpses of flamingos have been washing up on the shore. And there's just one here, but they've been washing up, and they're tens of thousands. My examination of these corpses showed that they had trace elements in them, which would have come from the local pollution, from the local factories and mines which were going into the lake. So for example, arsenic, which is a byproduct of the gold and nickel mining industries, and there's gold and nickel in the area. So I started to wonder whether I had any part in this mass flamingo die-off. And well, it's not like I've got loads of gold jewelry lying around, but I did learn that gold is used in small amounts in things that I do have, like mobile phones, like laptops. And then nickel, well, that's used in stainless steel. So think bathrooms, taps, shower heads, that kind of thing. And also in lots of other metal alloys. So coins and spectacles and cutlery. And then I started to nose a bit more, having realized that the possessions that I have in my room in Doha somehow connect to the cousins of the flamingos on the beach. And I nosed a bit more, and I discovered that the Andean flamingos, which are vulnerable, one of their preferred habitats are these beautiful lakes, these wetlands in the Andes. And these are also being mined for other products which also relate to me. There's lithium, which of course is in rechargeable batteries. So again, phones and laptops. There's sodium carbonate, which can be used in paper, glass and soap manufacturing. And there's borax, which is used in detergents and hair gels and eye drops and even in lipstick. So back to where this story all began, back to my bathroom. And basically from my bathroom, I'd gone global. I'd gone to the forests of the world, the primary forests of the world. I'd gone to the lakes of East Africa, and I'd gone to the wetlands of the Andes, and then back to my bathroom again. And basically, I can do that with pretty much any possession I've got. Now, I can also do it with every move I make, because of course, every decision I make, every choice I take, well, that in some way relates to energy and resources. So how I'm going to get to the shops, what I'm going to buy at the shops, what am I going to eat, what temperature do I want my shower and for how long, when and do I turn the light switch on and off. And all these actions, all these decisions connect me to the wider world, and connect me to the natural world, which I'm a part of, and firmly position me as a tiny pinprick in the great planetary ecosystem, which I'm so lucky to be a part of. Now, it's not like I wasn't already aware of this. I mean, no, it's my job, I am, but I'm trying to use this time, this quieter, more reflective time to instill in me more deeply my connection to nature and how every action that I take has a wider implication on the planet. And then when I do that, it somehow becomes easier, it becomes more natural to change my behavior or to develop the good habits, the good green habits I've got, to take on new ones, to try and get rid of some of the bad ones. Because suddenly the simplest of actions, and it could be having a bite to eat, could be turning a light switch off, having a shower, suddenly those take on global significance. If human and planetary well-being are connected, if our being is so connected to that, well-being is so connected to that of the planet, as it clearly is, as coronavirus is clearly showing us, then I have a responsibility to do my bit, to be as helpful to the health of all life on Earth as I can. And that's my health, it's your health, it's, our fellow human beings' health. Also the minor birds, the bulbuls, the scarab beetles, the flamingos, even the descendants of the fox that I met in the woods 40 years ago. And the more I'm connected to nature, the more I'm going to fight for it. The more that I'm driven by a deep love and respect for the natural world, then the more powerful and loud I'm going to be in trying to protect it. And here I am today, getting over my fear of public speaking and speaking out for the planet. Now, of course, I'm not alone, and I'm sure many of you are doing the same. Around the world, millions of people have been taken to the streets. Now, last year was a real turning point. People demanding that their governments take climate action, take the action that the planet so desperately needs. And as a result of that, climate emergencies have been declared in jurisdictions in 29 countries around the world, which is a really good first step. And even now, in the midst of all the chaos and suffering, there are people who, like me, have been connecting to the wonders of nature and feeling in tune with it again. There are communities who are growing their own foods. There's employees who are not going to want to do the daily commute again. Employers who are going to think twice about those long business trips. There are businesses who are committed to working with renewables, and governments who are committed to zero carbon futures. So there's a growing awareness that us humans need to work with nature and to make the planet healthy again if we are to have any healthy future of our own. Now, it's not going to be easy. It really isn't. I mean, for all as wildlife takes over our high streets, more trees are felled in the Amazon and with greater frequency at the moment. And then as the birdsong gets louder in our cities, Trump rolls back yet more environmental regulations and protections. And for every person who has the luxury of being able to connect to nature, well, there are even more people who are suffering the awful effects of climate change. And I'm putting the pandemic aside in this. I mean, I'm not, but climate change is constant. It's always there. There are people who are terrified by what's happening in nature at the moment through, you know, the drought, the hunger, the displacement, the disease. And I realize that I'm one of the very, very lucky ones. And I'm guessing that you probably are too. And here we are with time in our hands, able to connect to each other with our devices, with all the natural resources that they contain, and with the power to do so. In my case here in Qatar, that's definitely from fossil fuels. I don't know about where you're from, but quite probably. And it's people like us who have the power to try and align our behavior as much as possible with the health of the planet. To be this planetary stewards, really, that the world so desperately needs. Now, as I said, I think there's a long way to go. But I do feel that there's something afoot and things are changing somehow. And that having been brought to our knees by Mother Nature, we are having to think again by the way that we relate to nature and interact with the planet, which is our home. And I guess, in putting all the misery and death and suffering aside for the moment, I guess to some degree we have the pandemic to thank for this. And I have my animal friends to thank for helping to get through this really difficult time, and for reminding me how important that connection to nature is, for inspiring me to deepen that connection while I can, and for also reinforcing how good nature is for my health in every way, and therefore what my responsibility is to be as good for the health of nature, of the planet, as I possibly can be. And thank you too for listening, for joining me in my first Zoom talk, which actually wasn't nearly as bad as I thought it was going to be. I've really enjoyed it. So thank you very much for listening, and it's been a pleasure to speak to you.
So thanks, Amanda. That was really interesting, and your timing was brilliant. We want to open up for some questions. So if you do have any questions or comments that you want to make, what you would need to do is to unmute your microphone, and if you want to be seen, unmute your video so we can see you. So does anybody have questions, comments, thoughts, feelings, observations that you might want to share? And you would have to unmute if you do, otherwise we're not going to be able to hear you. So I'm assuming no one has any questions that they want to ask or comments that they want to make, which is fine by me. Is there anything else you want to add, Amanda, before we wind down?
I think I've been talking for quite long enough, to be honest.
Okay. So hold on a second. I've got so we've got somebody saying just somebody's just saying that's interesting. So we have Robert saying, is there any chance of a summary? Is there any chance of a summary? Could you manage a summary? I like that, Robert. Great idea. Or a recap.
Yeah. I think that the main message is that fundamentally we are a part of nature, which we all know, but we forget it in our busy, busy lives. And like the break that we're having from the rat race at the moment is giving us a chance to reconnect again, and to remind ourselves, as if the pandemic isn't kind of showing us really forcefully already, that planetary health and human health are intricately connected. And therefore, if we want to have a healthy future, we have to sort it out. We have to work within the planetary boundaries and to act with the health of the planet in mind. And I find, for me, I'm more able to do that when I'm grounded in the connection to the natural world around me, which is what I've been lucky enough to be able to do at the moment. So it's that connection to nature, which is a springboard into action to protect the planet, really, which I find really useful, and which is what is making me be here today. Quite a long summary. Does that make sense?
Well, it makes sense to me. Thank you. So if there are no other questions, what I've put up here is I've put up Amanda's email address, and I understand, Amanda, you're happy if somebody wants to ask you questions or make some comments. I'm assuming that you're okay with that. Did you want to say anything about any further talks, or if people are interested in any of your future talks, just to get in touch with you and you can actually keep them on a database for future talks?
Yeah, I can do that. Yeah, I mean, I hope I'll do more. This is kind of, I hope this is the first of many. Yeah, well, absolutely. I can keep people on a database. I'm also rebuilding my website, which is taking a bit of time, but hopefully there'll be more information on that. And actually, you could also follow me on Twitter and Instagram. I can also give, shall I write them down here?
Yeah, you can do that. Good idea.
Okie dokie. How do I do that? How do I, okay.
So yeah, you're going to have to go into the chat to everyone. Let's see.
Can I ask a question? Did what I say, I mean, I realised, as I said at the beginning, that I'm an incredibly privileged position because I do have access to outside space here. And I mean, is that, you know, is what I've said, is it stuff that you're able to relate to? I don't know where you are, whether you're, you know, in dense cities and it might be impossible to even go outside where you are. As I say, I don't know which part of the world you're in, but I wondered whether that was something that you related to as well, or whether this comes from my sort of very privileged position of being in a relatively sort of, I mean, it's not a natural space, like I said, it's a kind of a new city in the middle of the desert, but at least it does have some access to outside spaces and therefore to wildlife. Is that something that you guys have shared too?
That's maybe something I'd comment on. I'm listening to you from Milan in Italy. Live in central Milan, and we've probably got one of the strictest lockdowns that there are. I'm fortunate that where I live in central Milan, we still have a little bit of outside area, so I can get outside and sit under the tree and that sort of stuff. But I've still been very impacted by the change in nature, just the bird song all day, which I'd never have heard previously. I guess the paradox is all the last month we've been hearing lots of bird song and lots of ambulances. So a bit of a sad paradox there, but it's certainly seen a huge uptick for nature. And the weather. We've seen beautiful clear skies. Milan is usually sort of always has a bit of a grey tinge around it, but now it's beautiful air, beautiful blue skies the whole time.
And when are you? Are there signs of you being able to get out?
Well, from Monday, they're starting to relax the lockdown and people are allowed to move around a bit more and to go and see family and these sorts of things. So I think gradually from Monday and then through the month of May, things will be opening up more and more. And then it'll be interesting to see just the change in habits of people.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's about the habits, isn't it? I mean, yeah, and whether we can, I mean, I've been lucky to not have to worry too much about other things. That means I can sort of try and deeply entrench habits, which I might sort of practice, as I say, fail all the time or not that regularly, or just kind of instill it more deeply into my being. But it is about the habits. But as the pandemic showed, we can change our habits. You know, when there's a real, I guess it depends on how big we sense the threat is, and also what we're told we have to do, without wanting to make us sound like school children. But it is possible to change.
So Matt, just a couple of things. I know that Steph Fallows is saying, really interesting, thank you. I'm in Brighton, UK. I'm lucky enough to have a garden. Priest says, thank you so much, Amanda. I'm in London and really have appreciated nature from my garden. Same as Cameron, birds and ambulance and police. And I know that, Tanya, did you want to make a comment? Because I see a raised hand.
Yeah, I think one of the really interesting points is the habits that people have picked up whilst they've been on lockdown. And if you've been lucky enough to get outside to nature, depending on the severity of your lockdown, I think it raises many questions about urban living. and communities and eco builds, and also for the need of green spaces. So many developments, building developments certainly in the UK, are designed without integrating green space. And I wonder if one of the things that might come out of this period is not only that we've noticed nature, but our need for nature and to be immersed in nature. And I think it's a big question, and something for urban developers and urban designers to be looking at going forward, because it just feels like it's something that feels so integral to us now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are various examples of that happening around the world. I mean, Singapore, for example, is known as the Garden City. It's Asia's green city. And there's some extraordinary examples of urban architecture there, which build the nature into the urban settings. So these kind of tall tower blocks, which look like forests in a way, they're absolutely beautiful. And as a result, it's cooler in the city, and also the air is cleaner. And there's a general sense of well-being. And as I said, scientific studies prove that this is good for us. And there's also, since you're in London, there's a really interesting project, which to me excites me so much, because it is a way of bringing nature right into the city. And it's called, you might have heard of it, the London National Parks. I mean, it's Sadiq Khan is pushing it, but it is across the city. There are these people who are protecting wildlife in the city that I had no idea existed. Rangers, obviously not now, but people who are promoting nature within the city and trying to really weave it into the fabric of the city, which after all is the way that even the Victorians did it. It's not long ago that the need for green space was built into the city, and the respect and the understanding of nature as being utterly vital to our well-being. That's why we have all these amazing parks in London. So there are movements going on around the world, but of course the density of our mega cities makes it so hard now. But I agree with
you.
Yeah, but it was really interesting, that scientific talk that said actually if there's 2 hours, that can either be within the research, rather not talk, within parks within a city or in the wilds itself. It was that you can get that strong connection to nature even within the urban environment. And we're so lucky in London, as I say, places or different parts of different cities where the buildings are packed so intensely. So,
it's really, but I think it's one of the things that isn't integrated into any planning. I mean, if you go up to, say, Manchester, where they've got an enormous amount of regeneration or certainly building luxury flats, but there is no community space. There are no community spaces. It's not integrated into the building, and I think it's about what becomes important, but ultimately is what economy drives it. And that is always one of the biggest questions. And thinking about some of the other points that you made in your presentation, was just thinking it's not even necessarily about the will to change, it's about the economies of change. And I think that's where the biggest resistance comes. The reason why they don't, certainly for here, everyone wants to be released from, not everyone, I don't, but people want to be released from lockdown. Mike's laughing, I love it, just being on my own, not having to integrate. But I think that being released from lockdown, and ultimately so many things, the first thing that a lot of people do, want to get on a plane, do that. And my biggest point or question really, I think, is going forwards, is it's about incremental change, and what would be the 10 steps we could make in order to make those changes. Because when people look at climate change and all of those impacts from using our lipstick, from using our phones, it's like, we all know Amazon don't pay their tax. Has anyone stopped using Amazon? No, they've literally, exponentially increased their use during this time. And so it's sitting with what we believe is integral to us, but or important to us, but at the same time, what else is important to us? And I think that is the ultimate difficulty, is those economies, economy versus integrity.
Yeah, And it's all very well to
Interesting.
talk about, you know, changing habits when where it's within a much wider system. I'm fully aware of that.
Yeah.
And Amazon, I mean, I mentioned loo rolls, 9 million trees chopped down to make loo rolls each year. Well, packaging is 3 billion. 3 billion trees are cut down to make packaging and paper each year, and even more now. What's I going to say? But I mean, I think what I hope. I mean, I tend to be hopeful about these things. I mean, the situation we're facing today does show that the economy is a subsidiary of the environment. You know, it's all
Yeah.
planetary health means economic health as well. And you'd be really, you know, I was going to say you'd be foolish to cling on to the old ways, but of course, no, we see that everywhere. And that is the climate and the environment is such a polarizing issue now that it's going to be a fight, but it's about which way the balance tips. There's an amazing figure which
Can I just ask you, Amanda, I know you work for Al Jazeera, but do you have any influence in government or with government? Can you start any sort of committee almost, if you like, to try and put forward your views to the politicians who are the ones who are ultimately responsible for how much our world is changing? Unfortunately, they are.
Yeah.
Is there any way you can start a committee going, or are you part of one where we can start to do everything you're talking about, where we can start to put a brake on everything that is not connected to and is destroying our world?
Yeah, I mean, I guess this is in a way why I'm doing this talk and why I kind of feel a real urge to put myself out there, because my position at Al Jazeera, right now I'm in Qatar and I'm longing to get home. My plans for getting home this year, who knows how they'll work out with what's going on now, but I'm longing to get home. And part of that is because I want to be more useful. It's one thing making content. We make great content and wins awards. Occasionally you can change some policy, but it's not, I haven't within the environmental programs I'm doing. And there's all very well doing content, but how do you transform that into action? So I'm not on a government board. I'm not in a position when I'm pressurizing governments. I'm doing what I can in my own. There's no way I can pressurize the Qatari government, but I am working with sustainability groups in Qatar, and I'm bringing environmental awareness, or trying to, into Al Jazeera. So that's what I'm doing in my own particular world right now, while feeling that the fight is elsewhere. So this, in a way, this Zoom talk is the first step of that, but actually it's the first step to turning that content into action.
Yeah.
I'm thinking beyond my current work, you know, how do I do that? You know, it's not enough to put content out there that fits the needs of a television schedule and is limited to, you know, everything's limited to budget, but it's quite limiting in some ways. So I'm actually working out ways of being able to raise awareness, but also translate the awareness into action through really powerful content. So,
Marina has a question. Marina, go ahead. You're going to have to unmute. Marina?
See? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Oh, cool. Okay. I want to say to Amanda, first of all, thank you so much for this talk and for the inspiration, basically. And where I think many times I'm a wildlife photographer, so I many times include in my presentations parts of conservation. So I try to speak to people about how are things, so they can know. At least they can know what is going on nature and wildlife on the planet. But sometimes I think that me and many other people, we are talking to the converters, talking to people that they are really aware. So my question is, how can we reach the people who are not aware of climate change, or who doesn't care, or people who don't want to give up to their lifestyle? So how can we reach that people, that's the ones that we need to really connect and to really make them think about well, about everything you talk about, what is going on, about how every single action we do impact the planet. So what do you think about this?
Well, I think that's a really good question, and it's the kind of the nub of it, really, because if we could, reach people and change people's attitudes, then I mean, we'd be sort of out of this mess. But it's an interesting one. I mean, first of all, back to programs. I mean, there is a reach on television channels which doesn't necessarily translate to action, but does build awareness. And there's also, I think I think at some point the pressure on the system is what you have to aim for. So it's back to action again. And, some people just won't be converted. And especially in a time when the environment and climate change, it almost is a matter of belief. So people who don't think climate change is happening are also people who think that coronavirus is not a major thing, and they vote for Trump. I mean, it's kind of, there's a denial of the science, and it's all related to a belief in a way. And how do you stop people like Bolsonaro? I don't know. These are obviously people in power as opposed to the consumers or citizens on the ground. But I think at some point it is about working, I think, preaching to the converted, and I know exactly what you mean. I think it is about building that base so that then eventually the system kind of topples. Maybe, I mean, there's Erica Chenoweth, who's a social historian. She worked out from looking at past social movements, so apartheid, suffragettes, for example, civil rights movements. She worked out that it's only with 3.5% of a population that if you have that amount of people behind you, and if that many people are mobilized, I mean, it's not that many at all, then you can really achieve big social changes. But I think it's really difficult with climate change because so often it's about fear. Now we know fear works with COVID-19, but it doesn't work with climate change and the destruction of nature because it's just not tangible. And my approach would always be to inspire and to talk about a better life, to talk about a life that, post the pandemic, I mean, I would have, prior to the pandemic, let's put it that way, I would have said you can have a sustainable life in which you don't have to give up too much. You can, maybe you think again if you're going to book another flight, but now with the pandemic, I'm not sure. But I think reaching out to the people who I think it's kind of probably a bit of a sort of maybe not looking at it directly, but trying to inspire to the possibility of a better life. But it's so hard. That's a waffly answer because I don't think there is a clear answer. But at some point you're just not going to convert everybody. It's just not going to happen. And so I think you kind of have to rely on the change that is happening in people who are beginning to listen. And I think many more people today have woken up to it, even during the time of the pandemic, because there is a much greater awareness of the interrelation between planetary and human health. But also, as it said last year and before, I mean, there was a real awareness that there hadn't been before. So I guess we have to hope that that's going to be incremental.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm optimistic, actually, even though things can be a little bit difficult right now. I'm optimistic that people will make a change and we can reach more and more people every time. But I would love to reach faster, much quicker, and to much more people. But we're in the way because we have the voice. Not everybody has the voice to connect with people, with big amounts of people. So we can do it. We need to reach as much people we can.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And also we do have to reach to the top. We do have to reach, as Grace was saying, you do have to talk to governments, because I think it is that two-pronged thing. I mean, it is about the grassroots, but and people change their behavior. But let's face it, many people aren't going to do that until they're actually told to, until the other options disappear. So I think it's firing on all fronts, basically. It's going to be hard work. It really is. But like you, I'm hopeful.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Cool. So Amanda, can we leave it there?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And also, I'm very aware that you put up your Twitter and your Instagram details. So those of you who want it, it's there. The final thing I want to say is that I have recorded this onto cloud. So if you do want to copy, email Amanda, and Amanda will send you the link to cloud, because you might want to share it with friends and family as well. I'll probably end up putting it on YouTube, but I don't know what a good idea that is, Amanda, considering the background. But thanks very much, and I really appreciate the time and the effort and the commitment that you put into this process. I know it was very challenging for you at the beginning, but I hope you enjoyed yourself.
I did. No, I really enjoyed it. It's been a real pleasure to speak to all of you. And Mike, you've been amazing. You've encouraged me so much, and I'd be doing something if you weren't encouraging me, but maybe not putting myself out there quite as much as I have done today. So thank you very much indeed.
Good. Thank you. Okay, everybody, we're out of here. Thank you very much for all your support. Cheerio. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.